Over the weekend, Afghan government troops in the north of the country abandoned their posts and fled to neighboring Tajikistan. The reason? A Taliban advance they felt they were ill-equipped to oppose. It's a pattern playing out across the country, with the Taliban now controlling some one-third of the country's 421 districts. These gains come as international troops continue to pull out from the country, a scenario that's left many Afghans worried about their future.
These Afghan people are determined to leave the country. That's why thousands of them have gathered at this passport office in capital Kabul, trying to find a way out. Their future has become too uncertain as the effect of the US troops' withdrawal starts to unfold. Most of the districts have fallen. There's not a single district without fighting. The Taliban have even reached the chief of police's office and provincial capitals. I've come here to get my passport and get out of Afghanistan. It's not safe here. Many embassies have registered a dramatic increase in the number of visa and passport applications. As the Taliban advances, people fear the hard-won progress over the past 2 decades will start to roll back. Women and girls, for example, went from near total exclusion from public life to being able to work and study in mixed schools today. Now, these gains are hanging in the balance.
Very recently, we have reports that districts that have been taken over by the Taliban, they have already imposed restrictions on women, on media. For instance, women are in Tahar reportedly not allowed to leave the house without a male chaperone. Clinics have been closed. There's also reports of media blackout.
This is happening despite the Taliban's promises that the public has nothing to fear. And the situation could intensify. The group has already made significant territorial gains in the past months. Afghan forces are struggling to hold them off.
Now our people thinking if our government cannot to control this situation, maybe the civil war will be start. So that's the main problem why people trying to go abroad.
Those who couldn't afford a visa are seeking to leave illegally. Many of them are young people. They're about to cross the border to Iran before embarking on further journeys, hoping to secure a better future.
One section of Afghan citizens that's particularly concerned about its future are its women. And for more on that, I'm joined by Aisha Khurram, a law student at Kabul University and a former Afghan youth representative to the UN. Aisha, nearly 50% of Afghanistan's population is women. How worried are they about life under possible Taliban influence?
Well, if we look at the rapid and unconditional withdrawal of the US troops, and since the announcement of United States and NATO troops withdrawal from Afghanistan, we can see that the slightest hope for peace also vanished. And right now, there is a win-lose mentality on the ground, and Taliban are gaining more territory. And it's leaving a lot of people, not only women, but all Afghanistan is worried about what is to come. And now the future of the peace process, the future of Afghanistan and the younger generation it's all in ambiguity, it's in question.
Now, the Taliban, as you correctly point out, have rapidly advanced across the country. From what you are hearing, can you describe for us what the situation is, particularly for women in the areas that they control?
Well, women right now, women living in some of the districts, their situation was relatively better since 2001. However, there is a huge gap of opportunities and facilities when it comes to urban and rural areas of Afghanistan. But the relative success and the relative security, the relative progress that women had even in the forest districts of Afghanistan, it was something to be preserved and protected. And right now, as Taliban are gaining more territory, as the government is staying silent about it, and as the United States is withdrawing irresponsibly, it all makes women more frightened of what is to come. And right now we are left with no guarantee of any future that we could look forward to.
Now, we're also getting reports that the Taliban are being welcomed in some of the areas that they are capturing. What explains this support for the Taliban?
Well, in some of the districts that are right now under Taliban's control, over the years when there were airstrikes and there were some of the war crimes committed by both the Afghan government and the international community, it really created this sense of among people that they could rely on community, on the people who are from those communities who are rising against the government. But does not particularly mean they are supporting Taliban's ideology. You see, in the past 20 years, a generation was raised and born in this conflict. Now they even forgot what this war even started at the beginning, at the first place. And right now they are fighting, even not knowing for what reason. So some of the people are even joining one or another side just for the sake of survival.
Talk to me a bit about the conservative nature of Afghan society. I mean, how much of a priority is girls' education or women's participation in politics, for example, among the general population?
Well, 20 years ago, when United States and NATO started military engagement in Afghanistan, I was 1 year old, born as a refugee in Peshawar. And I returned to Afghanistan after 2001 with my family. I was a child. I grew up here. I went to school. I went to university. I'm still at university. And you see that back then, when everything started from the very beginning, we were building from the scratch. We were building from the ashes. There was a lot of hope, a lot of optimism, and women were accommodated in the society. But today, everything is in question, including the future of women's education. And the most concerning of all is the increased level of violence. But beside that, even during the peace process, the language about the human rights and the rights of women in the post-peace Afghanistan was ambiguous. And that was a very concerning point for a lot of women.
Aisha Khurram, we'll leave it there for the time being, but thank you so much for joining us today. And Afghanistan's neighbor, Pakistan, has long been seen as having influence over the Taliban. For that reason, Pakistan's involvement in the peace process is seen as crucial to its outcome. Relations between Pakistan and the Taliban go way back. The group itself was formed in the early 90s, primarily by Pashtun students in Pakistani madrasas or Islamic religious schools. Pakistan was one of only 3 countries that recognized the Taliban when it ruled Afghanistan between 1996 and 2001. And in the last few years, Pakistan has played a key role in bringing the Taliban to the talks table. For more, let's head to correspondent Shazeb Jalani in Karachi in Pakistan. Shazeb, aside from Pakistan's influence over the Taliban, what is driving Pakistani engagement with the Afghan peace process?
Barish, the conventional wisdom around the world is that because of Pakistan's deep involvement in Afghanistan over the last 4 decades and its closeness to the Taliban are often seen as Pakistan's proxies. But what we are hearing now from Pakistani army leadership is that they are losing influence with Taliban. Last week, the Pakistani army chief and the head of its ISI, the intelligence agency, was briefing a panel of parliamentarians. And they were told that they don't have as much influence with Taliban as people seem to think. And there's growing anxiety within Pakistan that if things go haywire next door, Pakistan will face a really difficult time. So we've also heard from other think tanks like the International Crisis Group in Washington last week. They are also saying that Pakistan's influence may not be as much with Taliban as we generally seem to think. So it's an open question how much Pakistan can really tell Taliban in terms of coming to peace negotiations or renouncing violence.
What are the fears in Pakistan that if Afghanistan does not go down the peace route, as it were, what will happen? What will be the effect on Pakistan?
So, analysts, journalists, think tanks have been saying for a while now that we are headed for a very difficult period in this region. But now we are hearing it from Pakistan's army leadership, from political leadership. The biggest fear is Taliban gaining more and more territory, eventually taking over Kabul, and then Pakistan also facing a problem in terms of the Pakistani Taliban becoming more active. There are already reports, there's evidence that in Pakistan's tribal areas next to Afghanistan, Taliban and other militants are picking up pace and activity. So the big fear is there will be more militancy in Pakistan. And if Afghanistan does descend into chaos and anarchy and civil war, there will be more refugees. The country already has 3 million refugees, and there will be people coming across the border. So those are the major fears at the moment.
What is the thinking in Pakistan, Shozaib? Does Pakistan believe the Taliban should be a part of any interim government in Afghanistan, for instance?
Officially, Pakistan says it has no favorites. It believes that whatever happens in Afghanistan should be Afghan-owned, Afghan-led. But we know from Pakistan's deep involvement with the Taliban, the way it delivered Taliban, for example, for negotiation with the US, that it would prefer if Taliban were in power. I mean, we have to recognize that Taliban are now an internationally recognized entity. The US had an agreement with them. Pakistan, Iran, India is engaging with them, and Russia and China have hosted them.
Shozaib Jilani, we'll leave it there for the time being, but thank you so much for this update from Karachi in Pakistan.